Ethan had never seen so many alien species gathered in one place before, and the grand, interstellar auction hall was buzzing with noise and flashing lights as traders, merchants and scavengers from hundreds of planets came to bid on strange relics. Old ships and lost technology, the smell of burning plasma fuel mixed with the scent of exotic spices from a dozen worlds, and the air was heavy with tension as deals worth fortunes were being made every second. Ethan was not a rich man, he was just a small cargo pilot struggling to survive among giants in a galaxy where bigger corporations swallowed small businesses like his without a second thought. But today, he believed his luck was finally about to change. He had come here with the little savings he had managed to collect over the years, hoping to buy something cheap, something valuable, something that could help him escape the endless cycle of debts and failed contracts, and when he saw it listed in the catalog, his heart skipped. A derelict alien ship found drifting near the edge of a dead system, no registered owner, no official markings, no known history. It was mysterious, ancient, and surprisingly cheap. The auctioneer called it Lot 17, and described it as a non-functional vessel recovered from deep space, its systems inactive and its origin unknown. But Ethan noticed something strange every time Lot 17 was mentioned. The room grew quieter, and several alien bidders whispered among themselves. And some even left without explanation. It was as if they were afraid of the ship. But Ethan only saw opportunity and adventure in it. The bidding started, and to his surprise, very few people joined in. It was almost like they wanted someone else to take it. He raised his hand cautiously, expecting the price to skyrocket, but instead the numbers crawled slowly, and within minutes, he had won the bid at a fraction of what he expected. His heart raced with excitement as the auctioneer confirmed the sale, congratulating him on acquiring a rare relic of unknown design and origin. After signing the papers, Ethan walked to the docking bay where the ship waited, silent, dark, and cold under the dim station lights. Its black metallic hull was covered with strange faint patterns that seemed to shift when he looked too closely, as if the metal itself was alive. He felt a strange energy humming in the air around it, almost like the ship was breathing. He tried to ignore the shiver running down his spine and stepped aboard. The interior was silent and covered in dust, but the walls were unlike anything he had seen before. They were smooth and seamless, flowing like liquid metal, and glowing faintly with hidden symbols etched into their surface. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as he explored room after room, each one stranger than the last, until he found himself standing in the central control chamber at the heart of the ship. The air here felt heavier, warmer, almost alive. And in the center stood a strange cryopod locked inside a transparent casing, glowing with a soft pale light. Cables and conduits ran from the pod directly into the ship's core, as if whatever was inside, it was powering the entire vessel. Ethan hesitated. His instincts told him to walk away, maybe even sell the ship immediately, and forget he had ever seen it. But something deep inside him pushed him forward. He placed his hand gently on the glass, and suddenly the ship came alive. Lights blazed across the walls, alien symbols flared to life, and a low hum filled the chamber. He stumbled back in shock as the pod began to hiss, releasing a cloud of cold mist that spread across the floor. The casing split open with a smooth mechanical sound, and his breath caught in his throat as he saw what lay inside. A young alien woman, her skin pale with a faint iridescent glow, her long silver hair floating slightly as if suspended in invisible currents, strange markings traced along her neck and shoulders, and around her throat was a slender metallic collar etched with unknown runes. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She was alive. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Who was she? Why was she locked inside this pod? Why was she connected to the ship before he could react? Her eyes opened, glowing faintly like twin moons, and she stared at him in confusion. Her lips parted, and in a soft, broken voice, she whispered something he could barely understand. It sounded like ancient words carried through time, but one thing was clear: she recognized him somehow. Before he could ask anything, alarms blared across the station. An automated voice announced unidentified energy surge, detected all security units. Respond immediately. Ethan's panic grew as footsteps and heavy boots echoed down the docking bay outside. Someone had noticed the ship awakening, and they were coming for him. He turned back to the alien woman, but she reached out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her voice clearer now as she spoke words that made his blood run cold. She said, "You unlocked the bond. You are now my husband." He stared at her in shock, unable to breathe, unable to comprehend what she meant, and before he could speak, the entire ship shook violently, as if something massive had just latched onto it. Outside he could see flashing red lights and dark silhouettes surrounding the docking bay. Whoever they were, they wanted the ship, and maybe they wanted her too. Ethan had no idea what kind of danger he had just stepped into, but deep down he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. Ethan could not move as the strange alien woman's glowing eyes locked on his, and the words she had just spoken echoed endlessly in his mind. She had called him her husband, and he could not understand what she meant. The alarms outside were growing louder and heavy. Footsteps were rushing toward the docking bay, but inside the ship time felt frozen. The woman's grip on his wrist was firm and cold, and he could feel a faint vibration running through her skin, almost like the same hum he had sensed in the walls of the ship. He swallowed hard, trying to calm his racing heart, and asked her who she was and why she was here. But instead of answering, she tilted her head slightly and spoke in a soft voice that sounded broken, yet strangely melodic. She said that by touching the cryopod, he had activated the ancient bond protocol, and now the ship had chosen him as her mate. Ethan stared at her in disbelief, trying to make sense of her words, and before he could respond, the walls of the chamber lit up with strange flowing symbols, and the ship's artificial intelligence spoke in a calm, synthetic voice, confirming her claim. It explained that whoever awakened the core was automatically bound to the last living heir of the royal bloodline, and that separation between them was now impossible. Ethan felt like his entire world was spinning. He had come to buy an old ship to earn a living, not to marry an alien queen from a forgotten race. He stepped back, shaking his head, refusing to accept this madness. But the moment he moved too far from her, a sharp pain tore through his chest, and she gasped, falling to her knees, clutching her collar in agony. Ethan rushed forward instinctively, and as soon as he touched her, the pain stopped instantly, and the glowing runes on the collar dimmed slightly. She looked up at him, her voice trembling as she whispered that if he rejected the bond, she would die. Ethan froze at her words, his hands shaking, his breathing uneven, and before he could ask anything more, the docking bay doors outside slammed open, and armed soldiers stormed in, their weapons drawn and their armor shining under the station lights. Ethan panicked, but before he could react, the woman raised her hand and a sudden wave of energy burst out from the walls of the ship. The soldiers froze mid-step, their weapons useless as an invisible shield surrounded the vessel. The ship's eye announced that external defense protocols had been activated, but warned that the shield would not hold for long. The woman turned to Ethan, her silver hair floating slightly around her face, and she told him they had to leave immediately or both of them would be captured. He hesitated for only a second before realizing he had no choice. He followed her as she led him to the control chamber and placed his hand on a strange crystal embedded in the console. The moment he touched it, he felt a surge of warmth rushing through his body, and the walls around him shifted like liquid metal. The ship responded to his thoughts as if it was alive. Engines roared to life, and the docking clamps released with a loud mechanical snap. Outside the station, loud sirens blared as security ships scrambled to intercept them, but the woman who finally introduced herself as Lyra told Ethan to trust her. She instructed him to focus his mind on escape, and before he could ask how, the ship leapt forward with a blinding flash of light, entering faster than light travel without any input from him. Ethan gripped the console tightly as his stomach churned from the sudden jump, and Lyra knelt beside him, breathing heavily, the runes on her collar glowing faintly. She explained that this ship was more than just a vessel. It was a living construct built by her people, long before most civilizations even learned to leave their planets. She told him that her people had been rulers of a vast empire, but a great war had destroyed their world and left her as the last surviving heir. She had been placed in cryostasis to keep her safe until someone worthy could awaken her and bind. With her, Ethan listened silently, struggling to process everything. His life as a simple cargo pilot seemed to shatter with every word she spoke. He tried to tell her he did not want to be anyone's husband, but the AI interrupted coldly, stating that the bond could not be reversed and that their life forces were now intertwined if one of them died. So would the other. Ethan felt trapped and angry, but when he looked at Lyra, he saw fear in her glowing eyes, and he realized she was just as much a prisoner of fate as he was. Their moment of silence was shattered when the ship's alarm blared again, and the AI reported multiple hostile vessels approaching at high speed. Ethan turned to the main display, and his heart skipped a beat. Several dark alien warships were chasing them, weapons charged and ready to fire. Lyra's voice trembled slightly as she explained that they were part of a faction that had betrayed her family long ago. They had been hunting her for centuries, and now that she was awake, they would never stop until she was captured alive. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling a surge of determination. He had no idea how to fight alien warships, but he refused to hand her over. Lyra placed her hand over his, guiding his thoughts through the bonded link, and the ship responded. Instantly, energy conduits glowed bright blue as weapons systems came online. Ethan felt the ship's power thrumming through his body. Like a second heartbeat, the pursuing fleet opened fire, but the ship moved almost on its own, twisting through space in impossible maneuvers, while shimmering energy shields absorbed the blasts. Ethan could feel every movement as if the ship were an extension of himself. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Lyra urged him to trust their bond, and together they initiated a counterattack. Beams of concentrated plasma shot from the ship, striking one of the pursuing vessels and tearing it apart in a silent explosion. But there were still too many of them, and Ethan knew they could not keep running forever. Suddenly the AI interrupted again, warning that the energy core was becoming unstable, and unless the bond between them was fully synchronized, both of them would die. Ethan stared at Lyra, his mind numb with shock, but before he could ask what synchronization meant, she whispered softly that the process would expose their deepest fears and memories, and that there was no turning back once they began. Ethan had no time to think, no time to question. He nodded slowly, and Lyra took his hands, her silver eyes glowing brighter as the ship prepared the ritual. And outside, the dark warships closed in like hungry predators, ready to strike as the chamber filled with swirling light. Ethan felt his mind being pulled into something vast and alien, and for the first time since the auction began, he realized this was no longer about buying a ship. This was about survival. Ethan could feel his mind stretching into something vast and endless as the synchronization ritual began, and the walls of the control chamber dissolved into a sea of light. His breathing slowed, and his heartbeat matched the soft humming of the ship around him. It felt as if he was floating between worlds, suspended in a strange bond that connected his thoughts to Lyra and to the living vessel itself. Their minds touched for the first time, and in a sudden rush, he saw flashes of Lyra's past, images of golden cities built on floating mountains, alien skies filled with twin suns, and vast oceans glowing beneath crystal bridges. He felt her joy, her pride, and her deep love for her people. But then the visions twisted into chaos, fire raining from the heavens, dark ships descending like shadows, and screams filling the air as everything she loved burned to ash. He felt her betrayal as all eyes turned against her family, and her despair when they placed her inside the cryopod, locking her away as the last hope of her race. Ethan gasped as the memories faded, replaced by a sharp pull that brought him back to his own past. He saw himself as a child left behind on a cold, abandoned station, watching helplessly as the freighter carrying his parents disappeared into the stars, never to return. He relived the endless days of struggle growing up alone, scraping by on stolen food and broken machines, dreaming of escaping his small life, but never finding a way out until now when he bought the ship, thinking it was his chance at freedom, only to discover he had stepped into something far larger than himself. He opened his eyes and found Lyra watching him, her silver gaze soft and glowing, and he realized that she had seen his pain as clearly as he had seen hers. The bond between them was no longer just a forced connection. It was becoming something deeper, something real. Before he could speak, the ship's eye interrupted with a sharp warning. Enemy vessels closing fast, multiple lock-ons detected. Ethan turned toward the main display and saw 3 dark warships racing after them, their sleek black hulls cutting through the void like predators, closing in on their prey. Lyra's voice was steady, but he could hear the tension beneath her calm words. She explained that these were not just hunters, they were soldiers of the faction that destroyed her empire, and they would stop at nothing to capture her alive. Ethan gritted his teeth, feeling a strange rush of determination rise within him. He had spent his whole life running from problems, hiding from debt collectors, avoiding risks, but now he could not run, not when someone else's life depended on him. Lyra placed her hand gently on the console and told him to focus his mind on survival, to trust the bond and let the ship guide them. He did as she said, and instantly he felt the ship respond like it was an extension of his body. The living vessel vibrated with power, energy flowing through every conduit as alien symbols danced across the control panels. The pursuing ships opened fire, streams of bright plasma racing through the void. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to dodge, and before he even moved, the ship twisted violently through space, flipping upside down and sliding between the incoming blasts. The maneuvers were impossible for any human pilot, yet somehow he and the ship were moving as one, his thoughts merging seamlessly with its living systems. Lyra gripped the console, her silver hair floating as the artificial gravity fluctuated, and told him to prepare the weapon systems. Energy conduits glowed like rivers of light beneath their feet as the ship's ancient weapons powered up. Beams of pure energy shot forward, striking one of the enemy vessels and tearing it apart in a silent explosion, the wreckage scattering across the void. Ethan's pulse raced with adrenaline, but there was no time to celebrate. The remaining ships split apart, surrounding them on both sides. Lyra ordered him to trust her completely, and before he could ask how, she placed her hands over his and closed her eyes. A sudden flood of sensations rushed into his mind as he felt her thoughts merging fully with his. For the first time he could feel her fear, her strength, her hope, and her unyielding will to survive. Together, they guided the ship through a narrow field of shattered asteroids, using the massive rocks as cover. Plasma blasts shattered stone all around them, sending debris spinning into the void. The chase felt endless, and Ethan's muscles ached from the strain, though he was not truly moving but living through the ship itself. Finally the AI spoke again with a cold urgency, warning them that the enemy was locking onto the ship's energy signature, and that they could not outrun them forever. Ethan demanded a solution, and the AI revealed a dangerous option, a hidden wormhole ahead. Unstable and unpredictable, but the only chance of escape. Lyra hesitated, explaining that entering it without full synchronization could destroy them both. Ethan glanced at her, and then at the enemy ships closing in. His jaw tightened, and without a word he forced his thoughts into the bond, projecting his choice. They were going in. The ship surged forward, the engines screaming with power as they raced toward the swirling blue anomaly. The pursuing vessels unleashed everything they had, streams of light and fire ripping through the darkness. The shields trembled under the impact, cracks of energy flashing across the walls of the ship. Ethan gritted his teeth, refusing to give up, and at the last possible moment, they plunged into the wormhole. Blinding light swallowed them, twisting everything inside out as time and space seemed to tear apart around them. Ethan felt like his body was breaking apart, and yet he could feel Lyra's hand in his thoughts wrapped around hers, holding her close as the world shattered into chaos. and then suddenly silenced, they emerged into the calm emptiness of deep space stars. Scattered like diamonds across the endless black void, Ethan slumped against the console, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving. Lyra leaned against him, her breathing unsteady, but her silver eyes alive with relief. They were safe for now, but only for a moment. The eye warned them that the wormhole jump had drained the power core dangerously low, and that without completing the synchronization, the ship would not survive much longer. Ethan turned to Lyra and saw her collar glowing brighter than ever, faint sparks of energy dancing across the runes. She whispered that the bond was not yet complete, and that until it was, they would always be at risk of death together. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, his mind still spinning from everything that had happened. He had bought an old ship hoping for a better life, but instead he had inherited a living vessel, a hunted alien queen, and an unbreakable bond that tied his fate to hers. And somewhere in the endless darkness beyond the stars, he knew their enemies were regrouping, preparing to strike again. Ethan stared into the void, gripping the console tightly, and silently promised himself that he would not let her fall, no matter the cost. Ethan stood silently in the control chamber as the stars drifted endlessly beyond the viewing screen, his chest still rising and falling from the exhaustion of the wormhole jump. The ship was quiet now, but it was the kind of quiet that felt dangerous, like the deep stillness before a storm. Lyra sat near the console, her silver eyes glowing faintly as she stared at the runes on her collar. Her voice soft as she explained that the power core of the ship was linked directly to her life force, and without completing the synchronization between them, the core would collapse soon. Ethan listened carefully, but the weight of her words made his stomach twist. He had never wanted any of this, yet somehow he had become bound to a living ship, a hunted alien queen, and a war that was centuries old. The ship's eye interrupted his thoughts with a cold mechanical tone, reporting that the power reserves had dropped below 30% and hostile vessels had already started tracking their energy signature. Ethan clenched his fists, knowing they did not have much time. Lyra stood slowly, walking toward him with quiet determination in her steps, and she told him there was only one way to stabilize the ship and save their lives. They had to complete the bond synchronization fully. Ethan frowned, unsure what that truly meant, and Lyra hesitated before explaining that the process was not just about connecting their thoughts, but about merging their hearts, their memories, their emotions into a single flow. She warned him it would not be easy because the ritual would force them to face every fear, every regret, and every hidden pain in their souls. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly, but he nodded, telling her they had no choice. Lyra guided him to the center of the chamber, where the floor shifted beneath their feet, forming a circular platform that began to glow with soft blue light, alien symbols spiraling outward from the center as the ship prepared the ritual. Ethan felt the air grow heavier, as if gravity itself thickened, and a deep hum vibrated through his bones. Lyra placed her hands on his chest, her touch warm and strangely comforting despite the chaos around them, and she whispered softly that he should not fight the bond, but surrender to it and let the ship guide them. The moment her words faded, the world around him dissolved into pure light. Ethan felt himself falling through his own memories, and he saw himself as a child again, standing alone in a broken docking bay, watching the freighter carrying his parents vanish into the darkness of space. He felt the cold loneliness that followed the years of surviving without love, without guidance, scraping by on broken machines and scavenged parts until bitterness became his shield. Lyra's voice echoed faintly in his mind, and suddenly her memories bled into his. He saw her childhood in a golden city filled with floating gardens and crystal spires, heard the laughter of her people beneath twin suns, and felt the warmth of her mother's embrace. Before it all turned to ash, he felt her betrayal, as trusted allies turned their fleets against her, family burning her world and slaughtering everyone she loved. He felt her fear when she was placed in the cryopod, her last sight, the faces of the few who remained, begging her to survive for the sake of their race. Ethan gasped as the memories intertwined, his pain and hers merging into one endless river until he could not tell where his thoughts ended and hers began. The ship's hum grew louder, surrounding them with waves of energy as their bond deepened. But then everything shifted. The light around them shattered into shadows, and Ethan suddenly found himself standing in a vast dark void where whispering voices filled the air. Alien shapes moved just beyond his sight, their presence cold and heavy. Lyra appeared beside him, her silver glow faint against the darkness, and she whispered that this was the test, the final barrier to full synchronization. They had to face the fears buried deepest in their hearts, or the ritual would fail. The shadows closed in, forming shapes from his nightmares. He saw the faces of people he had failed, the debts he could not pay, the regrets he had buried deep inside every choice that led him here. Then the vision twisted, and he saw Lyra on her knees, surrounded by fire, the collar on her neck glowing bright red as she screamed in pain. Ethan reached for her, but his hands passed through her body like mist. Panic clawed at his chest until Lyra grabbed his arm. Her grip steady and warm, she whispered that the darkness was feeding on their doubt, and they had to trust each other completely. Ethan focused on her voice, pushing aside his fear and holding onto her presence. The shadows recoiled, slowly fading into the distance as their thoughts merged fully. The chamber returned around them, and Ethan felt the energy shift. The glowing symbols on the floor blazed brighter. The ship itself shuddered as if awakening from a deep sleep. The IS voice came alive, more vibrant than before, announcing that the bond synchronization had been completed fully and the power core was stabilizing. Ethan fell to his knees, breathing heavily, drenched in sweat, but Lyra caught him before he collapsed, her expression soft yet fierce, her silver eyes bright like twin stars. For the first time since he had touched the cryopod, he felt a strange sense of belonging. The ship no longer felt alien, it felt like a part of him, and through the bond he could feel Lyra's heartbeat, steady and strong. But their brief moment of peace shattered when the AI reported that a massive hostile fleet had just emerged from hyperspace, their location compromised and escape routes cut off. Ethan rose to his feet, forcing exhaustion aside, and stepped toward the console as the display lit up, showing dozens of enemy ships surrounding them like a net. Lyra's voice was calm but firm when she said they had one chance left. Hidden deep in the heart of the ship was an ancient defense weapon, a relic of her people's forgotten empire, capable of destroying entire fleets in a single strike. But activating it came with a terrible price. The weapon was tied to her life force, and using it would drain everything she had, leaving her dead. Ethan stared at her, shaking his head, refusing to accept that choice. But Lyra placed a hand on his face, her touch gentle and steady. She whispered that if they did nothing, both of them would die anyway, and their enemies would claim the ship and her secrets. Ethan's jaw tightened as anger and fear churned inside him, but before he could argue further, the enemy fleet opened fire, beams of energy slamming against the shields, shaking the entire vessel. The AI announced that the defenses would not hold for long. Lyra turned to him one last time, her voice soft, yet filled with unshakable resolve, and asked him if he trusted her. Ethan met her gaze, and without hesitation said yes. The collar around her neck blazed with white light as their bond surged with raw power. The ship roared to life, its living systems glowing like a star, and in that moment, Ethan felt everything the vessel thought, everything Lyra felt, and everything the ancient bloodline demanded of him. As he placed his hand on the console, ready to unleash the weapon, he knew there was no going back. The stars outside burned brighter as energy built within the core, and the enemy fleet closed in, preparing for the final strike. Ethan stood at the center of the glowing control chamber, his breath deep and steady as the living ship thrummed with power around him. The stars outside burned like molten fire, and the massive enemy fleet surrounded them from every direction. The display showed dozens of warships closing in, their weapons armed and ready to strike. The eye repeated urgent warnings that the shields would fail in less than 1 minute, but Ethan's mind was calm despite the chaos, because through the bond he could feel Lyra beside him, her heartbeat strong, her presence steady, and for the first time since the auction, he did not feel like a man out of place. He felt like this was where he was meant to be. Lyra stepped closer, her silver hair flowing softly around her glowing collar, and she whispered that the weapon buried deep within the ship's core could destroy the entire enemy fleet, but using it would take all of her life energy, leaving nothing behind. Ethan's hands tightened around the console, his throat dry, his thoughts a storm of anger and fear. He could not imagine losing her. Now, after everything they had endured together, she looked at him with calm, unshaken resolve, her silver eyes reflecting the lights of the chamber, and she said softly that if they did nothing they would both die, and the ship would fall into enemy hands, and her people's legacy would be lost forever. Ethan shook his head, refusing to let her sacrifice herself, but before he could speak, the ship rocked violently as a direct hit slammed into the shields. Sparks rained from the ceiling panels, and the AI warned that another strike like that would breach the hull. Ethan met Lyra's gaze, and in that single moment he understood her choice, and she understood his. There was no more time for arguments. There was only trust. He placed his hand over hers on the console and whispered through the bond that he accepted everything, her destiny, his fate, their connection. The collar around her neck blazed with blinding white light, and the runes on the walls of the chamber pulsed in perfect rhythm with their heartbeats. The entire ship trembled as if awakening from a deep sleep. Alien symbols spiraled across the control panels, and the AI's voice changed, becoming deeper and almost alive, announcing activation of the celestial weapon. The enemy fleet opened fire again, beams of burning energy streaking toward them, but the ship absorbed the attacks, drawing raw power from every strike. The air inside the chamber grew heavy and charged with electricity, as if the stars themselves were bending around them. Ethan felt his body grow lighter as his mind fused completely with the ship and with Lyra. He could feel her thoughts, her fear, her strength, and beneath it all, her quiet acceptance of whatever came next. He refused to accept losing her. Not like this. He focused everything into the bond, pushing his determination into her mind, promising silently that he would not let her die. The weapon began to charge, its energy building to impossible levels until the whole vessel glowed like a small star. The enemy ships faltered, hesitating, as if sensing the immense power about to be unleashed. Then the AI gave a final countdown, and Ethan and Lyra spoke the command together through the bond. The weapon fired, and a silent explosion of light that expanded outward in a massive wave, washing over the enemy fleet. Entire warships dissolved into nothingness, without even a sound, their systems collapsing under the sheer force of the ancient energy. Within seconds, the battlefield was empty, debris floating like ash in the void, and silence returned to the stars. But the victory came at a cost. Ethan turned to Lyra and saw her collapsing, her body trembling as the light from her collar faded. He caught her in his arms, calling her name, but she was weak, her voice soft as she whispered that too much of her life force had been drained. He shook his head, holding her close, refusing to believe it. But through the bond he could feel her slipping away. He begged her not to leave him, but she smiled faintly, touching his face, and whispered that the bond they shared was deeper than life itself, and as long as he lived, she would always be with him. Ethan closed his eyes, tears burning his cheeks as the ship grew silent around them. But then something unexpected happened. The AI spoke again, its voice strange, almost reverent. It announced that a hidden failsafe had been triggered. The ship's living core had absorbed part of Ethan's energy through the bond and transferred it into Lyra's body. Her collar flared weakly, and a faint glow returned to her skin. Her breathing steadied slowly, and she opened her silver eyes again. Ethan stared at her in stunned relief, pulling her close as he whispered that she was not allowed to leave him ever again. Lyra smiled softly, resting her forehead against his, and for the first time since he bought the ship he felt peace. But it did not last long. The AI interrupted once more, explaining that the weapon's activation had released a massive energy signature that would draw attention From every major power across the galaxy, within days they would all know the ancient ship had awakened, and its last royal heir was alive. Ethan understood immediately that their battle was far from over. Their enemies had been destroyed, but the galaxy would not leave them in peace. He looked out at the endless stars, knowing that this choice had bound him to a greater destiny than he had ever imagined. He turned to Lyra and saw the same determination in her glowing eyes. Their bond had begun as an accident forced by fate, but now it was something they both chose together. The ship hummed softly, as if sensing their resolve, its living walls glowing faintly with dormant power. Ethan placed his hand on the console and whispered a single command, setting a new course into uncharted space. Lyra stood beside him, her hand sliding into his, and together they watched the stars stretch into streaks of light as the ship leapt into hyperspace, leaving the battlefield behind. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and countless enemies would rise against them. But Ethan was no longer the lonely cargo pilot dreaming of survival, and Lyra was no longer the last heir trapped in stasis. They were bound by heart, by fate, and by a living ship that carried the secrets of a lost empire, and whatever waited ahead, they would face it together. The end.